In this episode of American Giants.
And I said almost in passing, hey, if you ever run across one for sale, you know, I'd really like to have one.
And I told him, you know, it's unlikely you're going to find one.
The only thing I know is it's buildings for sale. Maybe call the realtor.
There's just people down there looking at me like, what are you doing? You're cutting our icon off of this roof.
50 years ago, a fiberglass company in Venice, California started making large fiberglass statues. Today, over 150 of these giants still dot the American landscape and have become known as Muffler Men. I'm Joel Baker, and there isn't any Muffler Man I won't go see. Finding them and telling their stories are my passion. Neto is my film crew, and Michael is our restoration expert. Join us as we search for American Giants.
Well, I'm Russ Lowe, and I am here in my hobby store that I own with my son Brandon. We started this about 10 years ago, 2006. The story of our interest in Muffler Man goes all the way back to early 1960s. I was in grade school, and right across from McDonald's, there was this giant holding a tire. It was at the tire store there, and I passed him every time we would go. And I always remembered him, and for years I didn't see any more. Living in South Georgia, there weren't any. That's where I lived most of my life. But I always remembered him. And sometime, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, I started getting a little bit of an interest. Then I ran across American Giants, started looking at some things, and we started talking about it. I said, boy, it'd be cool to have one. Oh, well, hey, let's build a model. We sell models, we make models. I'm a model train guy. You know, a little diorama with a gas station and a Muffler Man in front, that'd be awesome.
A lot of people that build models, myself included, you can make a little diorama, make a miniature scene of whatever. There is a model kit of an old Texaco gas station. And I thought, if you built that gas station, put some cars and some little figures in there, and then had a Muffler Man to scale sitting next to it, I thought it would be the coolest thing.
So now we have a Muffler Man model, and I think, well, the guy at American Giants, he'd probably be interested in this. I'll shoot him an email. So I did. And just so happened, Joel was traveling through Cherokee, North Carolina, which isn't too far from Blue Ridge. And so we drove up one afternoon to meet him. I said, I'll carry him a model of the Muffler Man. I'm sure he'd appreciate having one. And so we did that. We looked at the one in Cherokee, North Carolina, had lunch, and I said almost in passing, hey, if you ever run across one for sale, you know, I'd really like to have one. And it really was in passing, because your comment, I remember, was, well, they hardly ever come up for sale, but I'll keep you in mind if one does.
What I love to do is get those phone calls and get those emails from people like Russ and Brandon, who just also have caught the bug. They have a passion for Muffler Men, and they'd really like to own one, and especially the people that want an original one. American Giant Shop, we're a restoration shop. We really don't make new ones there. We restore the old ones. We restore international fiberglass original Muffler Men. So I really enjoy working with people who catch that vision and really want one, and they're passionate about it, and they're willing to wait however long it takes to get a real one. Those are the phone calls, those are the emails, those are the people I really enjoy working with. And so when I heard from Russ, you know, and I told him, you know, it's unlikely you're going to find one right away. They hardly ever come up for sale. But I don't forget people like that. I don't forget people like Russ. And sure enough, you know, in that situation, time paid off.
Well, for me, the Giants and several other things I'm interested in, it's the vintage of them. It's the fact that they were made so long ago. These particular Giants, and they were made by a company that no longer exists. So the ones that are out there, that's it. There's, sure, there can be copies made and stuff, but the original ones that are still there, regardless of what condition they're in, just intrigue me. It's cool seeing them completely restored, but it's also really cool seeing them in pieces because that's how they were. They've never been touched. So I think the history of them is really what intrigues me, and of course their size.
Brandon talked about, an original versus a remake, and that's really an interesting thing because that really wasn't an option. When I started doing these videos, it's like if you wanted a Muffler Man, you had to find an original, And a few years ago, we started working with Mark Klein. We had the Canada guy we pulled out of Canada. That was a complete mess. When he was done recreating that and restoring that, before it went up to Wisconsin, before we sold it, we made molds of it. And really the idea behind the molds wasn't to mass produce Muffler Men, but it was to provide a few Muffler Men for people that couldn't find originals. And also it was great for us to be able to work with Mark on spare parts and things like that. And so that's why we did that. So that, and also the Indian Chief that was in Asheville at Harry's on the Hill, that was another one that went to Mark for restoration, and again molds were made, so spare parts can be made. And that really changed everything a little bit, because now when people contact me and they want a Muffler Man, what we do is restoration. That's my passion is restoration and bringing the old ones back to life. But you really do have an option now. You can go new or you can go old, and it's really interesting the amount of people that will spend the extra money to get an original restored rather than a remake, because it's all about the history and it's all about what Brandon and Russ wanted, and that's the nostalgia that's involved with these Giants. I find that probably about 80% of the people I talk to that contact us, they want an original. They want the story, they want the history, they want to know that it was made at International Fiberglass in the 60s, and it went down this long list of owners and this traveled road of who knows where these Muffler Men went. But it's amazing how some of them are well traveled in all the different businesses they've advertised for. And it's really been interesting to watch how it's really the originals that are still the most popular.
One day Joel calls me on the phone or sends me an email, I don't even remember which, and he says, you were looking for a Muffler Man. I might have an idea for you. He called me about the one in Chicago on Sed's Mufflers, and the information I got at the time was, well, Sed's has closed down or moved, the building is for sale, the Muffler Man is in pieces, the head is gone, but that's what we have. Well, as a boat builder in my previous life, I had a lot of contacts with people that could do it, including my cousin is great with fiberglass. And so I told him what we had, and I said, can you restore this guy? And I sent him the pictures. He replied, hey, it's fiberglass, I can probably do anything. And I knew that was true, and I said, well, can you make another head? And we figured out that we could probably borrow a head and make a new one from Joel and American Giants if they would be inclined to let us borrow one.
Mr. Bendo, from what I know, which is very limited, it's been one of the harder things to research, was a version of Muffler Man that was made for muffler shops to advertise the fact that they could bend a muffler type to custom fit any car. From what I know, the Giant there was probably over a dozen Mr. Bendos sold. They were specifically called Mr. Bendo, and they wore, almost always they wore white pants, a red shirt. It was a bunion version kind of with a head, but they did not have a knit cap. Also, the arm position was different. The arm was either straight down at its side with the other arm up holding the iron bar, or one arm was a standard Muffler Man position arm to hold something like a wrench or a tire, while the other end was up in the air holding the bar. It was a very similar model to the American Indian. Today, there's just a handful that survive, and that is the version that was on Ced's Muffler in Chicago.
When you called us and told us about this, of course, the first thing we did was look it up, and, you know, there's nothing but legs there. And of course, we looked at your old video of you visiting it before. We found pictures of when it was complete, and of course, it was going to have to be put back together. Ced's muffler shop was closed down, so we had to figure out how to get in touch with him.
I remember Joel saying, I don't know how to get in touch with him. The only thing I know is the building's for sale. Maybe call the realtor. So I did. It's amazing what you can find on the internet. I called the realtor. He said, well, I'll check with the owner. So some time goes by. He calls me back. He says the owner might sell. He really wants to see it restored. You know, there's no head. And I said, well, see if he will sell it headless. I will buy it as is. And believe it or not, he said he would sell it. So we had a trip to Chicago. We were going to come by and rent a truck, get all the tools, get everything ready. We're going to drive a truck. We're going to go get it. Everything was all planned out.
When the storm came through and blew him apart, the head, I don't know if it rolled off of the building or it was on the whatever, but it went missing. Somebody had obviously stolen it. For, you know, a couple of years. He tried to find it. You know, had no luck at all. Put out a cash reward, just couldn't find it. And so he was interested in selling it because he couldn't put it back together. He had him on the shop originally, you know, from the 60s. So it was an icon, so to speak, in the neighborhood there.
All right, so the head, the missing head. All along I wanted the original. And then one day I get an email from Joel. He says, look at this picture. And there's a picture at a party or a concert in a little music venue very near to Ced's, like next door to Ced's. And there is a guy wearing the Muffler Man head. I mean, it's bigger than his whole body, but he's wearing it. The Muffler Man has been painted to look like some kind of pirate looking, I'm not even sure what it was. But a Muffler Man head on the same block as the missing head, gotta be the one.
You know, it's interesting, after this whole thing unfolded with Russ and Brandon and their interest in getting the Mr. Bendo, I went back and I looked at my timeline. There was one of the episodes we did for American Giants where we went to Ced's. The legs were still on the roof. We put a GoPro camera up to look on the roof. We didn't know it at the time, but the head was up there at that point in time. And I think it was later that I went back and I looked at when pictures of this head were showing up on Instagram, which is really how I found out that the head was still in existence. Is a hashtag of Muffler Man on Instagram showed this head. I think the earliest picture I found of that head was like 3 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks after we had been in Chicago and had put the GoPro on the roof and spotted the head up there, even though we didn't realize it at the time. And so, you know, we had just shortly after we were there is when that head disappeared off the roof.
So I started doing some research and found the name of the music venue, found the guy who owned it, found out where he worked. Be careful what you post on the internet. It can come back to haunt you. So I called him at work one day. I said, you don't know me. My name is Russ. I'm from Georgia, and I have just purchased the Muffler Man that was next door to your apartment. And he goes, yeah. He says, and I know you have the stolen head. There was silence on the end of the phone. And his words were, I can't believe you found it. I said, basically, you can talk to the police about it because I know there's a reward, I know there's some, or you can just give it back to me. And he says, well, he says, you're going to hear from another guy, I don't even remember his name. He said, John. John's going to call you in 30 minutes. And I think, well, maybe he will, maybe he won't. Well, lo and behold, John calls me in 30 minutes. He says, Yeah, this head that I've got in this apartment I moved into, I didn't know it was stolen. I said, well, you know, look outside your window, there's a headless muffler man standing there, and you have the head that matches. Oh, I don't know it's stolen. Okay, you know. So we made arrangements to get the head. I paid him $100. You just hold on to it, I'll be there in a couple of weeks to pick it up. He said, okay, no problem. And so, it looks like we have a head.
So we had a trip planned to Chicago anyway for business. We go up there not intending on bringing him back because a day or two before, the owner decided not to sell him. So we were kind of bummed.
Just a couple of days before, the realtor calls me and he says, the owner's decided not to sell. He's got some local people that'd like to buy it and restore it and keep it there. And I thought, well, I understand. To keep it local, that's fine. But boy, I was disappointed.
And we went on to our show in Chicago. After the show, we had some other things planned, some of the local museums, the U-boat that's up there. And that's where we were. We were standing in line. We were the next people to walk inside the U-boat, and the owner called and said, all right, I'll sell it to you.
And I'm thinking, great, what do I do now? We had no money, we had no way to get it back. We were leaving the next day, and so we start scrambling.
So over the next couple of hours, we, somehow or another found some banks that were open that would, give these Georgia boys some cash. We were able to find a rental truck. We picked it up the next morning. We got up there, had no tools. So thankfully, I think it was his son that met us there. Got us a ladder, climbed up on top of the roof, and he is fiberglassed to the roof. That's why his legs never fell off. They weren't moving. And thankfully, a guy from across the street that was a friend of the owner walked over and found out what we were doing, and he says, hey, I've got a Sawzall at my shop across the street. Would you like it? I said, absolutely. So he goes and gets the Sawzall, and I climb back up, and the only way he was coming down was to cut him off of his feet. So I just started guessing, and it's cold, it's blowing, the wind is just whipping, and then I started freaking out because I looked down and we're on top of this roof in the middle of this neighborhood, and here I am, I'm from a small town in South Georgia, so I'm finding myself on the top of this roof, and I look around, and for several hundred feet, there's just people down there looking at me, like, what are you doing? You're cutting our icon off of this roof. Well, as soon as I get one foot cut off and I start cutting into the second foot, he starts to sway. The wind's blowing him around. So I finished cutting him off, and Dad had that rope that we had climbed up and attached to him. And thankfully, I had about 2 or 3 inches left. And he just pulled him down. Nothing to it. So easy. I don't know why I was so worried about it. Handed him off the roof down to my brother. We loaded it on top of the van, then got off the roof, pulled him off the van, or the truck rather, put him in the truck. The upper torso and his 2 arms were inside. We loaded those up, and then gave the man the money, shook hands, and we were on our way to find the head.
We said goodbye to Said's son, and he says, yeah, you're taking an icon. I remember him saying that as we loaded it up. I really felt like we were doing something wrong. It seemed like we're stealing Mr. Bendo. But we closed it up. We literally drove around the corner. It couldn't have been 100 yards. And the guy opens up a garage door, and there's the head. It was right there. It had been there for 4 years, and no one knew it. And somehow, through the help of Joel and the American Giants and some people on Instagram and just the whole thing, it was right there. And so we got it, we closed it up, called the owner on the way out of town, and I remember leaving him a message. I said, well, the head was where the guy said it was, and we have it. Thank you for your help. Hopefully we'll get him put back together again one day soon.
It was really great to go down to Time Hobbies after they had got Mr. Bendo. I probably was on a trip going through there and stopped in to talk to them and look at him, and they had him in their shop in the back, I remember, and so typical. You know, we've seen so many giants after they've come down and before any restoration starts, and it's really mind-blowing how much work is needed on these giants. I don't think everyone really gets that, you know, and that's why probably some people, when they get them, they just put them up as is without restoring them, or they just slap paint over it and put it up, because it is a lot of work. It's a ton of work to patch all the holes and fix all the cracks and sand it all down and fix all the pinholes. And you know, I think what we do is really we go all out. You know, it's just kind of been our thing from the beginning. If we're going to restore these guys, we just put 100% into it. And you know, I remember going down there and seeing the giant there with the guys, and you know, they're telling me the story, and they have it all in pieces there. And you know, you always have this hope, like, you know, when we don't do a restoration, we always have this hope. You know, we're happy to talk to the people, but we always hope they put 100% into it. You know, please fix it up right. And these guys, you know, knocked it out of the park. They didn't do the restoration themselves, but they found somebody that could do it, and that's just as important. And you know, in this case, Russ's cousin did all the restoration work, and he did a fabulous job.
So we get him back to Georgia. We take him to my cousin who does fiberglass repair. We took him in pieces, and sure enough, he was able to do it. He had to rebuild the feet because, as Brandon said, it was just so much fiberglass over it. He just couldn't, you know, he just had to rebuild them from scratch. Just the soles of his shoes are new. So we get him back to the store, and he's in pieces, and you know, we're looking there, and then you can barely make out the Mr. Bendo on his shirt. So I start doing some research about what it was, and there's not a whole lot out there. Looks like the Bendo machine was some type of muffler machine back in the 60s. Perhaps it was a tie, because they would bend the mufflers to fit your car back then. So we weren't selling mufflers, so we need to come up with another name. We came up with Mr. Hobby because we sell model kits and we're a hobby store. And we thought, well, what is he going to carry? So we had ideas from all kinds of things, from a yo-yo that, you know, or whatever. What made the most sense? And so we decided an airplane. And so that's how the name came up, and that's how we decided what to put up there.
So that was really neat, seeing him in the condition he was in when we got him from Chicago, and then seeing him once or twice throughout the process. And then of course the day that he got here, we were just blown away. Just, here's this giant that this is how he looked, you know, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. And all of the different stages that he went through, and now he looks original again. And we had the equipment here that we needed to stand him up. We got him stood up, got him mounted in, got the airplane mounted in his hand, and it's just an awesome thing right here on the highway. Everybody that drives by gets to see him and enjoy him, and of course we get to enjoy him every day also.
I think when I get phone calls, I often get phone calls from magazines and newspapers and just people who are interested in muffler men. And I think the question I get the most is, you know, what's the draw here? What's the pull? Why do people like these giants, and why has, you know, the fascination with them continued to grow? And there's a few different reasons. You know, they're larger than life. There's the whole giant factor, which is a big part of it. But I think for a lot of people, it's nostalgia. It's a connection to a time that we no longer live in, and people like that. Those kind of things. That's why people are, you know, collecting old signs and old oil cans, and that's why, you know, American Pickers on TV has such a following. You know, it's for those reasons. It's because, you know, this is something from the 60s, and they're still around today, and they have all these stories to tell, and they've been through all these different things, and each one has a unique story, and a lot of people have memories of these giants from their childhood. I find that a lot of the buyers, a lot of the people who really want them, Not all cases, but often there's some kind of connection, just like Russ had, and so the seed gets planted when they are older, like, hey, maybe I could get one, like my uncle had, or like I used to pass on the way to school when I was a kid, and so I think that's a big part of it.
Well, I've come to realize that the older you get, the more things you have to remember. And a lot of us, we remember things from our childhood. And that's why the business we're in, people my age want to build the cars they remember. I own a 1959 Buick because my dad had one, and I thought it was great. And the Muffler Man was like that. I mean, I remembered him. I remembered how interested I was when I was very young. And I thought, boy, I have a chance that maybe I could have one.
When you have an interest in something like this, and you have the ability to make that, make it happen. You want something, you got the ability to make it happen. It's just super fun getting something, a piece of history like this, being able to restore it or have it restored, and then display it and let people enjoy that. It's worth it, and the end result is just very rewarding.
That was a great day when I saw him coming down the road right in front of the store, and the completed Mr. Bendo, and he stands again after many years of being headless and even without his torso, just the legs, and it was a great thing to finally get something that you've looked for a long time, and that was a really fun day. It really was.
With Muffler Men, nothing ever stays the same. If only these giants could talk and they could tell us everything that they've seen. Their world is always changing. They've seen so much change. And Mr. Hobby is no different. He saw all that change. He was in Chicago for so many years, then he came off the roof and he completely got restored. And he goes to Georgia, and then he's holding an airplane in front of a hobby store. And yet, it's not over for him, Things have already changed since I've been down there and I've recorded the interview with Russ and Brandon, and they told their whole story. Since that took place, which wasn't too long ago, a little longer than it should have been, but since that happened, they've sold the business. It's now going to be, I think, a dental office. And the story Russ told me, the new owners were very curious with this big giant out front and asked him where it came from and what the history behind it was and what it was called. And when it came time to negotiate the sale of the building, the new owners were like, well, we want the giant too. And Russ is like, absolutely not. That's like a special story in our family now. I'm not going to sell the giant with the building. And the new owners begged and negotiated and pleaded, and what do you know, after all that, finally Russ relinquished, and the giant will stay with the building. So now when you drive by that building, instead of the airplane, which has reportedly come out of the hands at least 10 times since they've put it up, will now be a toothbrush. I guess he's going to hold a giant toothbrush. So perfect example. Nothing ever stays the same. These giants have seen so many changes and held so many different things and represented so many different businesses. Is just kind of a part of the lore and the pull behind Muffler Men.